So, welcome everyone. I've been thinking a lot lately about how medicine teaches us so very many things. One of them being documentation and writing in that very specified way, right? We learn how to chart, we learn how to make diagnoses and speak with a very precise language um, in an effort to communicate to one another in a way that protects both patients and our systems. But one of the things that we rarely get to do is to reflect on what this type of work, caring for others, does to us, right? As human beings, there are great things that come of it, and then there are some things that maybe aren't as great. And so, when I was a medical student at NYU, something quite radical was happening in the background. A literary journal was being born inside one of the busiest public hospitals in the country, Bellevue. And it's a place where suffering and resilience and humanity and the deepest of kindness live side by side every day. So that journal, the Bellevue Literary Review, is now celebrating its 25th anniversary. And today we are just so fortunate to have Dr. Danielle Ofri, who is a physician at Bellevue. She is an author herself, and she's the founding editor of the Bellevue Literary Review. Our conversation isn't just about literature, it's about the importance of storytelling, why it matters in medicine and in life in general, and how writing can help us stay human inside systems that often ask us not to be. I hope you enjoy. So, welcome back to Prescribing Possibility, and I am here today with the incomparable Dr. Danielle Ofri. Welcome and thanks for joining us.
It's great to be here.
So, we were just talking before we recorded a little about I share a timeline with the Bellevue Literary Review. And so you started this in a public hospital, Bellevue, at a time when narrative medicine was kind of a new thing. What called you to initiate the review and the journal?
You know, like many things in life, it was a bit of happenstance of circumstances, but I had finished residency 2 years earlier, and I ended up taking off a year and a half, what turned out to be a year and a half. I'd been in training for a long time. I did an MD, PhD, and I had never taken off time after high school. In fact, I left high school early to start college, so I had been, kind of in training since age 5.
Right.
And so I took off time. I did locum tenens, which is temp work for doctors. I would do that for a month or so. And then I would travel, in South America until the money ran out. And then I would collect from Oaxaca and say, what's next? And I'd end up someplace else in some other small town. And I was kind of
Awesome.
in that time of both these small towns where I was working and small towns where I was visiting that I started writing. And, mostly the doctor shortage in America is in small towns. I spend times in tiny towns in New Mexico, rural New Mexico, New Hampshire, and not a lot to do in these places, certainly coming from New York City. And that's really when I was, canceled my New England Journal subscription, got some novels, and just began writing down the stories of residency, which, as you know, are intense and many and incredibly
Mhm.
intimate, with no plan of becoming a writer, just looking for a place to put all those experiences. When I came back, after the year and a half, I knew I wanted to come back to Bellevue, which is really my home in so many ways. But I thought about how can I bring these stories into my clinical work? And at the
Mm.
time, I was doing medical students. They would come for their rotation for a month in my clinic. And, every week they'd hand in a history and physical and H&P. And I'd have to grade it, and you read 1, 10, 20, 50, 60, and they kind of all sound the same. And just in exasperation, listen, guys, for one of these, can you just please just ask the patient what it's like to have diabetes and just write that. And so I started
Mm.
getting this really nice collection of essays from the students about just asking patients what it was like to have their illness. At the same time, we
Yeah.
had a new chair of medicine, Dr. Martin Blazer,
Mhm.
and he was asking the inpatient students on the clerkship to write a 1,000-word essay about anything. Philosophy, economics, biology, as long as it was inspired by a patient. So we each were gathering this sort of collection of interesting student essays. And a student colleague said, you guys ought to meet. So we kind of showed up with our stacks of essays. And also Dr. Jerome Lowenstein was also having his students write in the humanistic medicine program. So each of us had our
Hmm.
stack of essays, and we thought, okay, maybe we'll make some in-house publication. We'll photocopy, we'll staple it and pass it out. We thought, it seems like this is such a universal topic.
Yeah.
And we all bet that there'd be a larger interest. So we said, all right, we're going to start a literary journal, put out a call for creative writing, fiction, poetry, nonfiction on the topics of health, illness, and healing. Literally a 2-line call for submissions. We got 1,000 submissions. So
Oh my
we
gosh.
realized that we had really touched a nerve, that there's so much out there and so
Yeah.
little opportunity to grapple with it. We have lots of writing about medicine, top 10 tips for calcium and asthma control, but not what it's like to feel vulnerable and feel sick. And so that's how Bellevue Literary Review came to be.
That's incredible. And the three of you were kind of working in parallel, like universes, and then came together, which is, it's kind of fascinating how it all happened around the same time. But yeah.
Yeah, and here's this was our very first issue.
Yep.
You can see it there. We put the Bellevue Hospital on the front cover, and that was
Yep.
fall 2001.
It's incredible. And now this is the 25th anniversary this
Yeah,
year. It's
we did not
amazing and
expect to be here 25 years later. So this would be issue 49. Issue 50 is in
amazing.
press right now. We did a whole, new look. Part of in the beginning, we were doing all these wonderful archival photos. We basically
Yeah.
ran out because it's hard to find enough photos that have really good resolution you can do for that. So we started using contemporary artists. And so this issue, the theme was animalia.
Hmm.
Um, what, relationship with animals can teach us about being human. So we got this beautiful cover artist, and it's the back cover there, paintings
Beautiful.
about animals. So yeah,
Yeah.
25 years later, that was not in the plans. We just thought,
I was
okay,
gonna
let's put
s
out an issue, see what
Yeah, I was
happens.
gonna say, what was the plan? Like, did you just wanna see where it would go and if there was interest or
I don't even think we had a plan. Like just getting it out, the first issue, what was the plan? And in fact,
Yeah.
it was 9/11 happened right as we were
Mm,
going to press. In fact, we were our um, journal was at press. It got a little bit delayed, but I remember the printers let us do sort of an emergency notice inside the front cover to acknowledge 9/11.
mm,
And then, of course, we'd all planned like a big, reading, big launch party. And of course, nobody was in any mood to celebrate. And we went back and
right.
forth. Should we or should we not have this planned, event? And we finally decided that we would go forward, that I think people want to gather. And so we planned it for, I believe it was October 9th of that year, on a Sunday evening at Bellevue. And that morning was the invasion of Afghanistan and the beginning of the 20-year-long, war in Afghanistan. And so when the bombs started dropping, okay, nobody is going to be coming now. And it was standing room only. We had more than 100 people pack in the hospital. And you had to go at that time, the posters of the missing were still up. And
Yes.
the whole full block of Bellevue, they were building the Amcare building, but it wasn't built yet. So there was a
Mhm,
huge construction walk, a full block long. That entire block and the whole wall leading into Bellevue was covered with these posters. Of course, now they're all in memoriam posters.
mhm.
And the posters were all pictures of people smiling, wedding pictures. And it was so traumatic to walk down that hall that they had to open the back door. And many employees just, it was just too much every single day. And so we had
Yeah.
125 people come to us, come to a public hospital, walk past this emotional wall of photos and come to hear poetry, which I think just exemplified that at times of vulnerability and fear that we do turn to the arts and the community of arts to be together. And I believe
Mhm.
that is what BLR's turned out to be, this community of people who turn to the arts to explore shared vulnerabilities.
Yeah, and to kind of make sense of the things that just don't make sense.
Yeah.
I think another example of that, COVID, right? Of course, these traumatizing experiences, and so many kind of turn to expressing how they feel and their perspectives, and it's really wonderful. But now tell me where I'm wrong, but it sounds like maybe you weren't a writer to begin with. You said you started at that time. Had you done like English in college, creative writing
No,
and
I was a
nothing?
physiology major. I did a PhD in biochemistry, but I mean, I loved writing as a kid. I
Yeah.
always did. And loved reading, of course. And, all that kind of, went by the wayside a bit in, medical school and PhD training. But I always did love it. And I loved literature. And I remember I went to school because I had left high school a year early. I ended up going to McGill University, partly because I'd changed my mind last minute and the deadlines I'd missed for the American schools and friends said, oh, I know a school in Canada with late deadline. So I applied to McGill, knew nothing about it, showed up in this 100% science program. It's a British with like no liberal arts. But I met a graduating senior who said,
Mhm.
if you don't take a course with Professor Ruth Weiss, you'll have wasted your education at McGill. That's a pretty strong recommendation. Who's
Hmm.
Professor Ruth Weiss and what, pray tell, does she teach? And she taught Yiddish literature, something
Hmm.
I'd never even heard of. I just knew like Schlepp and Schlemiel, and that was it.
Yeah.
Schmutz on the X-ray, but I showed up, it was a good recommendation, and I, fell into the hands of someone who's passionate about literature that they teach. And I began
Wow.
reading the stories of Isaac Bashevis Singer and Shalom Aleichem and all these turn of the century writers. And I just was entranced. And then I took Russian literature and then Russian history, and I just kept,
Mhm.
and I loved being like thrown into these stories. And I was so also moved by particularly Russian Yiddish literature and their role in political movements and changing people's lives. And
Mhm.
it just I loved it. I mean, I didn't get a chance to get back into it until this time, and when I started writing these stories after residency again, I wasn't thinking about becoming a writer, I just wanted to
Sure.
write them. But then I was walking on 2nd Avenue, and I saw one of those little yellow boxes with the brochures for the Gotham Writing Workshop, and I just picked it up and
Mm.
took a writing class and discovered that I really love craft. And I didn't
Huh.
even know about writing craft. But I think craft was very appealing to me as a physician. I think we use similar kinds of craft in our diagnostic thinking and those skills. And so it just really appealed to me. And I started taking writing classes and then worked with a writing teacher. And then they said, it's time to get an agent. And I did. And, then went ahead, but that wasn't in the plans. And I'll just, if I want to
Wow.
close the story,
Yeah.
many, many years later, I don't know if you know or aware of the publication Publishers Weekly. It's a trade publication, which, for people in the industry of what books are coming out. So libraries and schools know what to order and bookstores. And so one of my books said, most books get in there. So my publisher, my editor sent me the little, a link to the little write-up. It was really nice. Well, one of the authors who we published in BLR got the physical journal, and she saw my name and she tore out the sheet, she folded up, she mailed it to me at Bellevue, which of course took like months to find me, but I got it. And I opened up, I got, I've already seen it before, but it's so nice. But I unwrapped the page and there's my book and a book by Professor Ruth Weiss on the same page, which had to have been
Oh,
Miss Kissman. And so years
yeah.
later, she came to give a talk in New York, and I went to her talk. I brought my books and I went up to her afterward to thank her for taking in like a physiology student into like her, upper level literature courses, and
Yeah.
thanked her. And we had nothing in common politically in any other way except for this love of literature. And she,
Yeah.
I really, the gift that our teachers give, and you never know where those teachers will be in life.
Isn't that the truth? And I have that feeling as I sit here and chat with you today, I was a second year medical student when 9/11 happened. And so we were just in the newness of like the humanities and medicine. And
Mm.
so some of those courses were all, not things that my friends were doing in other medical schools, but it was really interesting from my perspective that this would even be something we would be covering. And I find that I didn't study any kind of writing either, though I loved it. Interestingly, I was a Russian studies minor and did read Russian literature, so I understand that very intimately. But the fascinating part is that, I find that the writing community is very welcoming, particularly of people who maybe didn't, for lack of a better word, grow up in it. And there's so many people who are willing to embrace you um, and kind of help, move you along if that's something that you're interested in. So, yeah.
Absolutely. I find that too. And one of the things, BLR, so during the COVID pandemic, we were based at Bellevue, but part of NYU's Division of Medical Humanities. But during the pandemic, they said everything's got to go that's not clinical. And so we had, hunted for a new home, but of course everyone was too unsettled at the time. So we just became our own nonprofit. And so since then, we've really, it's given us the opportunities to widen our perspective. I think up until then, those first 19 years, we had two events. We had a reading for the spring issue and the fall issue, and that was it. And now, we've been able to really move on. One of the things we've been doing is writing workshops. In fact, we just finished our
Mhm.
second one last week, and it was really wonderful that people want to write about their experience with illness, either as a patient, as a physician or a nurse, family member, caregiver, and they want to grapple with it, not just in, what are the medical conditions, but what it felt like and what it brought up in them. Sometimes poetry is the right medium, sometimes fiction is the right medium or nonfiction. And I realize, so what I see BR has become is kind of a gathering place for people who want to grapple with our health, our illness, our mortality, healing in a variety of creative ways or centered on the written word.
Yeah, it's a beautiful way to really not just express yourself, but be able to kind of take things that maybe are still sitting with you in a really kind of, I don't want to say destructive, but in a not healthy way. And sometimes getting them out on the page really just helps to make that separation so that you can see it for what it was, an experience, and not have to necessarily carry it along with you. It's such a powerful thing. I'm wondering, what do you think as you've seen this evolve now over 25 years? Have there been any, particular themes or shifts in the way that the writers are kind of focusing their attention, not just the themes of the journal, but, have you noticed any trends?
I would say not anything that was unexpected. I mean, I think, illness is just it never goes out of style. As I always say
Yeah.
to my residents, interns, you'll never be out of a job because illness never goes out of style. So it's
Yeah.
always there. And even things that are common or even, you could say, quote, overdone, cancer and dementia. It's new for everyone who experiences it. You know,
Yeah.
as Anatoly Broyard, wrote, for my doctor, I'm just one case on his rounds, but for me, it's the crisis of my life. And so
Hmm.
when each person has their experience, it is the peak, or the or the abyss, shall
Right.
I say, in their life. And so, so in some ways, it has not changed. Although the writing, I think, just gets better. I mean, I think as
Mm.
we've established ourselves, more and we get more, we had 1,000 submissions, then we get 5,000 submissions now per year. We still publish probably 70 a year. So we have this blessed fortune of being able to choose among great writing. So I think the writing has gotten better and better, although it's always been good. And it's always painful to have to turn down so much great writing. But yes,
Yeah.
the volume that has
I
changed.
was, well, and that's a good problem to have, I guess, when trying to, continue this beautiful tradition that you started as just kind of a whimsical sort of thing. It's amazing, actually, that it wasn't I would have thought it was a very, you know, planned out and scheduled sort of event. So I had no idea. That's really
Well, if you can
fascinating.
imagine, here are three physicians,
Yep.
sitting there. I remember sitting in my office in 2 West 42 in the Bellevue Clinic with Dr. Lowenstein with different paperweights, trying to say, well, which kind of paper do we want and which kind of font? He a nephrologist and internist, right?
Yeah.
We were just kind of winging it, truly.
Yeah.
But we got great people. We got two wonderful poetry editors, a fiction editor who had good
Yeah.
experience in the literary world, and again, I think it was the community response that then gave it its life going forward and created what it is, which is really this community more than just
Yeah.
a journal.
Yeah, it's interesting because as I've been reaching out to colleagues and friends and writers in some of my writing circles and letting them know, I said, it's the 25th anniversary. And they said, oh my goodness, Bellevue Literary Review. I mean, it has this kind of gravitas to it when you mention it. And so, I'm curious, like, what do you see for the next, VLR?
Well, we've been thinking a lot about that. And I think
Mm,
leaning into this idea of communities is, I think, where we are. And rather than just being a journal you subscribe to, but it's a community that you're a member of.
mm,
And we've had more and more interactive type of events. We've started a conversation in creative writing and healthcare series to be live events with authors. We did the last one we did with Rana Oddish, Sandeep Chahar, and Teresa Brown. We had more than 1,000 RSVPs, and because it was a live event, people could ask questions. What was fascinating is to watch the chat. People were just wanting to talk to each other,
yeah.
as much as they wanted to talk to the authors. And I think that's where we see going forward. So we're launching things like, our book group that's going to be our book club that's coming out. We just launched the art and medicine program for clinical trainees. And,
Hmm.
we had expected, we're going to have it for maybe 15 or 20 students. We had 120 apply. We ended up making 2 sections with 40 each so we accommodate everyone. And we have people
Wow.
who applied from Nigeria, Turkey, who are willing to get up at night despite the time difference to be part of this.
Hmm.
So when we have a BLR ambassadors program, so all of these places where people want to have community.
Yeah. And
You
that's,
want to
I
pause
think
for that
that,
while that siren goes by? I don't know
yeah,
if you hear it.
yeah,
Okay.
just very vaguely, but yeah, it's
Okay.
New
Okay.
York.
Yep. Yep. I'll
Yep.
restock my tea. Okay, hang on. All right. Think good to go.
Yes. Yeah, right. Very good. So I guess one of the things that I find most interesting is you have so many different roles and hats that you wear, the clinical hat, the writer hat, personal hat, and then the editor hat. How does one kind of manage all of those different identities or components to your
Remember
to
that
your very
kid's book?
full life?
caps for sale, that
Yes.
kid's book where he has got all those hats stacked
Yep.
up. Um, that's what I feel like, and there's one more cap that I didn't even expect, but once we became a nonprofit, I became the executive director of a nonprofit organization, which I was not planning on in life, but it's a whole other thing that's completely separate from being the editor-in-chief.
Yeah.
Um, and it's been really exciting. It's hard, but then to get to see something grow. We had to create a board and think about finances and all those things. But yeah, it's been really interesting. They all play off each other, and I don't think I could do any one thing by itself. I think if I
Mm,
just sat, in clinic all day with Epic and my patients and did that, 24 hours a day, it's easy to become overwhelmed. And it's really clinical medicine's pretty tough these days. So I'm glad that I do it 60% of my time. And I will say that, running the organization, it becomes bigger and bigger. And what's really sort of taken a hit is my own writing. It's been hard enough
mm.
to fit that in, but I'm trying to do that. A lot of writing on airplanes
Yeah.
and in cabs and pretty much, anywhere. Like, if I'm standing in line for the bus, I will crack open my laptop and, start reviewing manuscripts. And I mean, back when we did paper manuscripts, I used to carry them in my lab coat pocket and rounds. I would wait for the elevator, and now I just carry my laptop and read. So yeah, I've kind of had to jettison like anything, frivolous that's gone. But I enjoy it. I mean, it's really, really fun,
Yeah.
to do. And what's so fun about it is I work with just fantastic people. The 25th anniversary committee is such a wonderful people and creative and interested and willing to give of themselves. The
Hmm.
BLR team, the editors, the board, they're just great people to be with. So it's very sociable and everyone's kind of in it for the right reason. And I think also, given how chaotic things are today in our wider world and
Mm,
but people are seeking someplace that has meaning, has
yes.
real connections, is not fluff, but is not like, killing us. It's just, it's lifting us up together. And I think it's no accident that is flourishing at this time.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. I think, particularly everyone, whether you have a physical ailment or not, our mental health, certainly in the last several years with COVID and all of the other things going on in the world, it's a wonderful thing to have such a creative outlet for those that are willing to be vulnerable enough to try. What would you say to a clinician, a physician or a nurse, or maybe just somebody who identifies as a caregiver, they're a teacher perhaps. What would you say to them if they don't identify as a writer? How could they maybe get over that kind of stumbling block and to give it a try?
Well, I would certainly invite them to be a reader first. Come
Mm,
read what's out there,
yeah.
and come participate in some events that allow you to see how people use writing in ways that doesn't have to necessarily be for publication, but for ways to grapple with the challenges in life. And I
Mm,
think, and one of the reasons I think that BLR has become so successful is that it truly is universal. I mean, you may go through life and never need an accountant or a lawyer or a roofer, but you can't escape the medical system. I mean, even if you
right.
eat, your wheat bran every day, you're caring for your aging parents or your young children or your neighbors. I mean, there's no way around avoiding, illness, vulnerability, the rebellion of our, minds and bodies for us or the people that we love. So we all have this. So one thing is that it's truly shared in whatever profession you're in. And there are not many spaces to grapple with that. And so I'd say,
Yeah.
come check us out. Come read. We have lots of stuff online. Most of our online events are all free. And we want people to see that there's a space to come think about this. If you want to come write about it, yeah, come write about it. We're planning to launch our BLR Writing Studio, which is just that, a low bar, just, come for an hour and write together online. And we can do that.
Mhm.
Maybe a couple prompts from an editor. You don't have to be engaged in a course or taking a project, but just come and write. And
Yeah.
hopefully people you don't have to see yourself as a writer to come write.
That's into that. Now, what are you? I want to just make sure that those that are listening have an opportunity to take advantage of all of the, I guess, interesting and fun new things. You mentioned the membership and the book club and the writing. There's also other events that are upcoming. Yeah, that
Yeah. We have
people
in-person
could go.
events if you're in New York City, and our website is blreview.org, and they're all listed there. And the Conversations in Creative Writing in Healthcare will be an ongoing series, and that will be online. And so I encourage people to come try. There's no cost to just RSVP for the link. You'll get to meet
Hmm.
a lot of interesting authors from different perspectives. Our next two ones are Writing the Body and Mapping the Mind. And you'll
Mm.
just be wonderful authors hear about their books, but be able to also ask them questions. And it's a nice way and meet other people. We'll be launching the writing studio. We'll have the writing workshop again. And there's just more to come. We also have a weekly newsletter. And because we're hitting our 50th issue, we usually have a weekly read. Our weekly read will be highlighting one of our issues going forward. So we're now on issue
Mm.
5 coming out this week. And so you get a chance to see, if you subscribe to our newsletter, each issue coming forward, interesting covers. What about the cover artists? And get to sample some poetry, fiction, nonfiction from there, and learn a little bit about the history of what happened. So, join our newsletter, and it's great stuff to read.
Yeah, I mean, what a beautiful evolution from how it started to where it is now. And so many, you know, congrats to you. And also thank you to you, because I really do. I have found that my willingness to talk about some of my own experiences comes from those very early days where we actually did a little bit of that in class form, and that it wasn't something that was so unheard of. Maybe in the grander scheme of things, it's not that common, right? But I had that experience. And so I just wanted to thank you for that. Very
Oh, you're
special.
welcome. I mean, it means a lot to us to hear that, we many years ago, and probably our 10th or 11th issue, we were in an editor's meeting, discussing stories. And one fiction editor brought up a story that she had read in the slush pile that she really loved. And we published it, called Girls at Play by Celeste Ng, one of her
Hmm.
very early stories. Many years later, I saw an interview in the New York Times where she wrote that around that time, she had just given birth and she had a severe case of postpartum depression. She said, I remember thinking,
Mm.
I'll never write again. And then her BLR story won a pushcart prize. And she said that was like this first light, in the clouds coming through, that maybe I will write again. And so
Yeah.
to know that, participating in that in writing has its own healing effect on the people who are part of it, the writers and readers, is really meaningful, because that's, it's not just a book on a shelf. It's a community of people who share something.
Mhm.
And to this day, Celeste Ng, links to our website, to her story. And so all
Mm.
kinds of people come through to our website, but thanks to her and her website. And so it's been amazing to watch her go on to great successes. We published in our second or third issue an early fiction piece by Abraham Verghese, who had never published fiction before. And
Oh,
he'd only
wow.
been a
Yeah.
nonfiction writer.
Yeah.
Leslie Jameson won a contest before her first book, The Empathy Exams, came out. And so it's been really exciting to watch people, move along in their careers from getting published in BLR. So it feels like we get to be these matchmakers with people. With agents
Yeah.
will say, hey, can you give me the email of so-and-so? I read their story. And of course, people love to be matched up with a new agent.
Yeah. I mean, that's just amazing, right? That the agents are looking at BLR, and it really is such a beautiful story for, what's possible when you just go for it. The three of you just decided. I love that so much. So
Well,
yeah,
I'll tell you just one thing. Edward Hirsch, I interviewed him, and we'll interview him again for Book Salon this May. He said literary journals tell us the news, right? That's where the new
mm,
writers are, and that's why agents read literary magazines. And I had from my in my own writing career, I won a contest at Missouri Review, and winning that contest, made a mark. People hear about it, and people call, and people see your work, and so it is really meaningful. Which is why I encourage people to subscribe to a couple of literary journals, because you prop up the whole literary ecosystem that then gives people opportunities to have their work read and have someone say, "Oh, I just came across this new writer I had never heard of before, and I was so moved." So I invite people to
yeah.
be good literary citizens. If you enjoy reading and if you like to write, or if you just, you know, want to help something good, this is a wonderful ecosystem, a community to help support, because it just gives back and forth to everyone who's involved.
Yeah, and the healing that happens for the physicians and nurses that are involved in it, the ripple effect of that and how that affects the people in their own world, their patients, and then the communities, like it really does matter. And so I encourage everyone listening to go and check out the website and become a member, support the review. It's really just an absolute a gem, and something that we're really very fortunate to have in the world.
Well, thank you so much for that plug.
Thank you. Yeah. Is there anything I haven't asked you now? This will be edited, but is there
Sure.
anything I haven't asked you that you wanted to bring up specifically?
Do you want to spend my own writing, what I'm working on?
Yeah, I do, because I know that you were working on something last year. I just didn't know if you were willing to talk about it or
Oh,
not.
sure. Yeah, yeah.
Yeah. Okay, so we were in touch by email maybe last year, and I know you were in the midst of your own manuscript writing. So what's on the docket for you, Dr. Ofri?
Also, I'm working on a book on facing our fears of death.
Mm,
And I've been intrigued about why it is so hard to talk about death, to plan for death, to be present at death. And it's been an amazing journey. It's been an
mm,
amazing journey interviewing patients, some of my own, other people, people in palliative care, anthropologists. It's been
mm,
such an interesting journey. It's really made me look different. It's really made me look differently at death, as well as some psychoanalysts. And so I'm just
yeah,
getting through the second draft. Can't give you a pub date yet, but it is actually getting done. Despite it all, it is
awesome.
moving forward, and it's
Yeah.
really exciting, and it just feels like the right time for that.
It does. Interesting. There's such now a lot of talk about like consciousness and, what becomes of our consciousness in death. And there's the spiritual, but then there's the philosophical and the physics of it all. My daughter's actually interested in consciousness and she's been reading Dr. Parnia's work at
Mhm.
NYU. Like there's so many interesting things in that field. But I think that the overwhelming, instinct to just not talk about it is something
Right,
that makes it more makes us more afraid of it and scared because we just
right, and it
don't.
doesn't get more universal than death. You can
Yeah,
all be 100% guaranteed of that. So
that's
that's
right.
one thing we all will have to face. I am
Yeah.
shooting for universality these
Yeah.
days.
Yeah, I think it'll be a beautiful contribution so that people can really, grapple with some of the bigger things in the world. Yeah, that's amazing. So we'll have to know when the pub date is.
I'll keep you posted.
Yes, please. So this has been lovely. Thank you so much for joining me. I love to ask my guests to see if they have a dose of inspiration that they'd like to leave the listening audience with.
So my dose of inspiration, I guess, is don't be afraid to put your thoughts on the page. It doesn't have to
Hmm.
be perfect. No one wakes up as James Joyce, except maybe James Joyce. The rest of us,
Yeah.
we have to learn along the way. So I encourage people, keeping a journal. Maybe that's too formal for people, but keep a scrap of paper, keep an open document, and jot these things down. Even if you do nothing with them, you don't have to publish something for it to be meaningful to have written. Sometimes just
Hmm.
the act of writing, just the act of telling a story, sharing it with your close friends, or no one at all
Yeah,
can be enough.
that's beautiful. Thank you for that.
You're
So
very welcome.
we wish the best to the Bellevue Literary Review. I'm hoping to get to the gala later in the year. There's going to be all sorts of fun things coming. So I encourage everybody to check out the website and to support the journal if they're able to do that. That'd be wonderful. So thank you so much for joining me.
Thank you. It was a pleasure.
Thank you.